efectivamente la comunidad científica reconoce que el Sol y los eventos solares tienen alguna influencia en el clima, pero es relativamente pequeña. Pero esto se ha debatido en la literatura científica, existen artículos que explican con mucho detalle cuál es el mecanismo físico. Y por supuesto, una cosa, posiblemente la única en que esté de acuerdo con lo que acabamos de oír, es que hay que basar todo esto en evidencia, en hechos, en mediciones. Y por supuesto, pues esa es precisamente la posición del consenso de la comunidad científica. Pero mi pregunta es, si está tan claro esto, se ha discutido y hay debate en la literatura científica, pues todas estas ideas de nuestro colega, él no las publica. Y hay, pues, o sea que habría que ver de dónde viene. Otro punto de vista, nada más para hacerlo muy brevemente, pues está la complejidad del sistema. Hay tantos datos que siempre es posible encontrar correlaciones. Un ejemplo, para exponer mi punto de vista muy breve. En México, no sé si en España, tenemos un poco la idea de a los niños pequeños les explicamos que los niños nacen porque los trae la cigüeña, ¿de acuerdo? Bueno, hay una correlación, pero extraordinaria, en un pueblo en Dinamarca, la cantidad de nidos de cigüeñas y los nacimientos de bebés. No sé si después de este evento alguien le podría explicar a nuestro colega cómo nacen los bebés.
Muy bien, adelante. Por alusiones, ¿sí? Adelante.
Well, I know how babies are born. Yes, where does all these ideas come from? Well, we have some equations which are not published, that is true. All the evidence of your failures are in published peer-reviewed literature, and I've shown it on the screen. Furthermore, our accuracy and success rate has been subject to peer-reviewed literature, and also weather bets with William Hill, where I've won money consistently, and they then banned me from that. Now, if you're going to take the view that you won't believe anything until it's been published, then you better stop using your mobile phone and stop flying aeroplanes, and don't listen to Bill Gates, because he's sitting on boxes and boxes of secret technology, right? Technology, you don't have to know it before somebody can believe it. What we're doing actually works, and it's proven in a scientific way that it works. The equations behind it all are obviously questions of, proprietary. They will be published in due course, and they will blow your mind. But in the meantime, we have to be strong enough before we can publish them. And I would say people should use them just like they use our forecasts, just like they use mobile phones.
Jerry Rifkin, por favor.
Here's what I think is incontrovertible: the geological record. We can show in the geological record changes on this planet over a long period of time. Now, this is the reality when we check the geological record. We have never exceeded 300 parts carbon per million in the last 675,000 years in the geological record. That was a long time before humans were here. We've been here about 175,000 years, anatomically modern humans. We have similar data for methane and nitrous oxide. Now, here's the second thing we know. We've never gone over 300 parts carbon per million in the last 675,000 years until the industrial age. And we can graph it. The minute you start with the industrial age, we spew massive carbon, and now we're at 375 carbon parts per million, and the trajectory is heading us to 450. This is the same with methane and nitrous oxide. And this is the third thing we know. When there's more CO2 in the atmosphere, and it tracks the industrial age, and more methane from related animal husbandry practices and nitrous oxide, when those molecules go in the atmosphere, they clog the atmosphere. So when the sun hits the earth and the heat radiates back, it hits the molecules. It reverberates with those molecules, and those CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide molecules force the heat back down. If you don't believe that, then I guess we're in a different world. So I won't impugn, you're trying hard to put a case together, and I actually listened very carefully.
Sure.
But what to finish here,
Sure.
if you have massive amounts of CO2 that track exactly the industrial age, because we spewed more, and methane, and more nitrous oxide, and they create a blanket of molecules so the heat can't get through them, the temperature increases. And in terms of the ice age, that's a bit of a red herring, because what the temperature changes show is not that you're not going to have more snow. What it shows is that with every 1 degree the temperature rises, the atmosphere absorbs 7% more precipitation and wildly changes the weather extremes in terms of snow, rain, floods, and droughts. Not that all of a sudden it's a cold year and therefore there's no global warming. So this is the questions I think really need to be addressed. And I have an open mind, but I've been looking at this as a non-scientist since 1980. And if anything, what appears to me is we've all underestimated the acceleration of climate change from industrial-induced activity because we can't wrap our minds around the subtlety of the feedback loops in this very complex system that's changing so radically because of our use of these particular fossil fuels. And that's what really scares me, that it's moving quicker because of the feedback loops.
Okay.
Short, please.
Well,
Short.
do I deny that CO2, water vapor, is an infrared absorber? No, I do not. And I would point out there's plenty of other things which affect what the atmosphere does, such as dust and aerosols. The point is, your theory is inadequate and a completely incomplete picture. The details of your theory show there should be a warm spot above the equator that's got warmer due to extra CO2. Actually, there's a cold spot. And the problem is, one of the problems, of many problems of your theory, but one of them is you leave out the fact that the whole thing is dynamic. You talk as if it's a static equilibrium system. It's not. It's a dynamic system. And if you read the later part of my presentation, but it's in the appendix, we put forward a case which shows why fluctuations, if taken into consideration, and our understanding, will lead to the cold spot as observed, not as observed by your theory. And it's not the case that the IPCC have considered solar activity. I've spoken to various leaders and lords on the matter and said, look, you are deliberately distorting what we say and you're converting solar activity into ultraviolet variation. No, we're not talking about ultraviolet. We're talking about charged particles and their guidance, which is a 22-year cycle, not other things which are an 11-year cycle. So the IPCC claiming they've listened to us is not true.
So, I've got a question for Piers. Is this working?
Great. Interviene Rodríguez Gay.
It's working now. I've got a question for Piers. I'm not a climatologist, of course, so my question is based on the fact that the way one analyzes data is the same in every scientific field. And basically, I'd like to know more about the William Hill story, because I was actually about to suggest that you put money on this, because you see, if you do that, and you know, publicly make money, then other scientists who may think that your theories are incorrect are still going to be interested. They're going to want to know why your theories are working. So, can we hear more about why you got banned from William Hill, and how?
Well, it obviously was banned because they were losing money.
Well, no, that's not obvious, because, I mean, it's not like blackjack, is it, where counting cards means
They were losing money.
it's something they can't fix.
Then why did they take any bets at all?
Oh, the point is they can change the odds. That's the
Oh, yeah. Well, they did change the odds a bit. But anyway, they got tired of losing money for 12 years and cancelled the arrangement, which is understandable. Why don't more scientists follow us? Well, many do, and off the record I can tell you we've got people who will not name inside large organisations who are very impressed. But look, scientists have to pay their mortgages. Money is shoveled into universities right now to promote CO2 theory of delusional, and I use the word correctly, delusional climate change, right? And as long as that continues, people will shut up, just like they shut up under Galileo. Look, we do not operate in a free society, and this meeting gives us a chink of hope that the word can get out.
Doctor Mario Molina.
Sí, bueno, quería hacer un comentario para aclarar mi punto de vista, que espero que no sea ofensivo, pero es el siguiente. Can you I can do this in English and perhaps then everybody,
Okay, no,
everybody,
up to
is
you,
that better?
Puede comenzar, no le importa, ahora ya está en la
as you
traducción.
Lo hago en qué
when
idioma?
I can...
En español, por
En
favor,
español,
que así
muy
vamos
bien. Bueno,
combinando.
repito la idea. Es la siguiente. Evidentemente
I
aquí...
can now, yeah.
Muy bien. So it's okay now. Evidentemente aquí en este foro no vamos a poder discutir el detalle de las preguntas científicas en unos minutos. Es evidente. Estamos totalmente en desacuerdo con lo que él llama hechos y...
Ha quedado de manifiesto que
Bien,
están en desacuerdo.
pero entonces, ¿a qué voy yo? Es que hay un sistema que ha desarrollado, pues, el método científico, la comunidad científica, y no cabe duda que ese sistema ha funcionado estupendamente. Es lo que nos ha permitido tener teléfonos celulares, tener confianza en tomar un avión. Pues yo vine de México y no me preocupé, llegué muy bien. ¿Por qué? Porque la ciencia nos ha dado pues todo ese nivel de vida, pero gracias a un método que se ha desarrollado con muchísimo cuidado. Bien, pues es con ese método con el que este grupo internacional, el panel intergubernamental de cambio climático, etcétera, pues toma sus decisiones. Es con ese método que todas las academias de ciencia, todas las instituciones pues profesionales, de químicos, de físicos, todos están de acuerdo. O sea que aquí hay una gran excepción y que tiene un método distinto, pero no es el método con el que yo me subiría a un avión, lo siento.
Well, I'm not asking you to
Wait a
fly a
moment,
plane
wait a
with this, but you could use a forecast.
Corbin,
to go
wait a
in
moment,
plane.
please.
Sorry.
So I have to say, I'm a complete amateur to this area of science. I don't know anything about it, but I am a scientist. I have always listened to the debate as you presented it and assumed that the scientists had the right answer. And I know that the Republicans in the United States who don't believe in evolution, much less climate change, are not to be trusted on issues like this. But I have to say, having listened to the three of you, I'm more puzzled than when I came in. I don't think there's any question that there has been an increase in CO2. The record shows that very clearly. There's no doubt that that's been caused by human activity because it comes up when human activity starts in the area and because it makes logical sense because we're producing all this CO2 from our cars, etc. But the question is, does that contribute to climate change and is there climate change? And there I have to say, I didn't see any data from you. I didn't see a slide that shows when CO2 goes up, temperature goes up, when it goes down, it goes down. I saw slides that all the scientists say that, but I didn't see that. And when I saw from him were slides that showing, oh, CO2 is going up and temperature is going down.
Okay.
So what I can tell you is that in terms of presenting your argument, even to the thinking public, and I'm not talking about Republicans now, I'm talking about Democratic gay scientists, it just needs to be made stronger. So if you can say in one sentence what the data is, that would be a good
Sí,
thing.
aquí, de nuevo,
Like we met in an elevator,
Sure,
and you
sure.
had to tell me before we got to the top floor.
Can you
En-
understand? I'm
Yes.
requested to respond in
Le pido que
Spanish.
sea en castellano para
Sí,
que...
es una pregunta muy importante, pero una respuesta muy sencilla. Por supuesto, yo no presenté los datos, por eso presenté el consenso de 4 años de estudio de 2,000 científicos que han hecho eso, precisamente esa pregunta, pero con muchísimo cuidado y que está ampliamente documentada en la literatura. Por eso, pues me pareció un poco absurdo aquí enseñar los datos de tanto trabajo científico, pero no cabe la menor duda de que esas presentaciones, esas gráficas, se oponen en su totalidad a lo que acabamos de oír de nuestro colega, te enseñan lo contrario. Por eso estaba yo poniendo un poco en ridículo el hecho de que con observaciones complicadas como las del planeta, puede uno llegar a cualquier conclusión, así es que en un elevador no se puede, se necesita un estudio de muchos años, muy cuidadoso, y por eso, si no es uno científico o experto en esto, lo que es atinado es confiarle al consenso de la comunidad científica a través de las academias de ciencia, a través de las asociaciones profesionales, a menos que piense que todos son unos idiotas o que todos están haciendo algo por dinero. No, pero es que así es como avanza la ciencia. Pero, por supuesto, si me da usted 10 minutos, le enseño con toda claridad los datos, pero es más, hasta los enseñé. Si se fijó, yo enseñé el aumento en la concentración de CO2 y el aumento de temperatura. Es el resumen de muchísimas medidas. pero por lo menos esa parte sí la enseñé con muchísima claridad.
Richie, one moment, and after you.
Just very quickly, I'm not a scientist either. Like you, I've studied this over the last 30 years. I've looked at it. All this information is available. You can Google it up. You can take a look at the first assessment report, the second, the third, the fourth. You can take a look at all the academies of sciences that have been involved, all the disciplines around the world. This is the biggest scientific project in history. Everybody may be wrong, and a few skeptics may be right. That's always possible. But as a layman, I took the opportunity to look at the information over the last 25, 30 years. And if I can do it, anyone else can do it. And let me say, when you look at these little variations, moment to moment, this is a complex biosphere that we live in. So at any given moment, you may have a temperature that changes in one part of the planet. You may have cloud cover. You may have an El Nino. You may have all sorts of things. And these studies are not designed to pinpoint every single moment and say, why isn't this going exactly the way the graph shows? What the climate studies show is a cumulative effect. But they make allowance for all the complexities in a system where you have all sorts of countervailing forces. So in a given month, a given year, a given 5-year period, there's going to be variation. You have to look at the cumulative impact over a period of time. That's what they've done in the studies. And they've even put in probability on the scenarios. Lots of probability studies. I also, as some of you know, I've challenged scientific judgment in many fields over the last 30 years. But I also think it's somewhat unfair to do a broad brushstroke and say that everyone in science is on the dole. Everybody except a few people are doing this just to get research grants. I just think that's an unfair. I think we don't need to go to that level. The level we go to is to ask in a sophisticated, very, very complex system, can we come up with some broad accumulative figures that then take into consideration the variances, the outlier situations that can change it at a moment.
Sure.
And from my point of view, what really gets me, I guess, as a non-scientist, is the feedback loops are moving us quicker toward these temperature changes.
That's right.
So even if you don't believe in climate change, we still have an energy crisis. And we've got to get out of that. I hope we turn the discussion, I hope we get to a discussion on what we need to do in terms of changing our fossil fuel regime. And then the doubters can say, well, I don't believe in climate change, but they certainly believe in high energy prices and not having a job and an economy on the rocks.
But to reiterate, the issue is so important and so critical that I hope it'll be possible to present it in a more Al Gore type Oscar-winning way, so that we can all see on the surface exactly where the data is and what the real killer points are. You know, sometimes things are so complicated that there's not just one factum that's the most important one, but there needs to be a story built up in a way that people can understand it beyond just saying that this is what scientists believe. For me, the idea of what scientists believe is right is, you know, for 50 years, scientists said that homosexuality was a disease, and that was the consensus. And everybody believed it, and everyone listened to them because they were the experts. But they were completely wrong. So that's why it has to be a good logical story that we can really bite into.
Okay, thank you very much. I would say, first of all scientific consensus hitherto has been broken and shown to be inadequate or wrong. And the CO2 theory of climate change is one of them. The idea we have to have an Al Gore way of presenting things does worry me very greatly, because his presentation of the issue was fraudulent. He concealed the fact that CO2 levels are driven by temperatures on average. Okay? The reason why Mr. Molina didn't present evidence is because he has none to present. Nowhere in the whole of the IPCC literature, and I have studied it, I have a first-class degree in physics from Imperial College. I've studied astrophysics, I've studied meteorology, I do long-range forecasting. I've looked at the IPCC and thought there's no evidence in there whatsoever. What they have is opinion polls and say, oh yes, this mechanism, this piece of fudge, that piece of fudge could explain this, that and the other, and we must do something about CO2. And then you roll in Al Gore and a politician. And then they have an opinion poll between people who are paid by interest groups to proceed in a certain direction. No, let me finish. Now, I would point out that you should have the answers, frankly, which the IPCC put forward. Because I put to the top scientists in the University of East Anglia, the meeting of the Royal Society, I said, what is your evidence? And they said three things. One, plants don't do as much as what you said they would do to cool the surface, which is a detailed thing. Fine. Then they said, Venus, that's hot. That's what they said. Venus is hot because of all the CO2 left. Now, I would say that's complete nonsense. It's because it's nearer the sun and there's so much atmosphere there, a vast amount of atmosphere, causing the effect that I mentioned earlier as to why it was hotter when there's twice as much atmosphere on Earth. And the third thing they said, it can't be anything else. What? What can't be anything else? Climate change can't be caused by anything else? Well, I'm showing you it is caused by something else. That was their scientific case. And, you know, I think that is pretty sad, and it shows the end of a paradigm.
Vamos a ir concluyendo esta parte.
And
Tiene
we're
la
now
palabra
at
doctor
beginning
Mario
and
Molina,
new-
pero vamos a ir concluyendo porque hay muchísimas preguntas que nos
Sí.
llegan
Sí,
también sobre la otra cuestión. Vamos.
Voy a ser muy breve. Insisto, no podemos resolver de esta manera esta controversia, pero hay una manera pues sofisticada, una manera que sigue los estándares de la comunidad científica para discutir esto con seriedad. Y esto se puede hacer con más tiempo, se puede hacer en parte con la literatura científica, pero no es la única manera. Y se ha hecho, se ha discutido, hay documentación muy clara de los efectos de todo tipo de eventos solares, y hay algunos muy importantes que han afectado la química de la estratosfera, que es algo muy cerca de lo que ellos... Pero, no hombre, desgraciadamente aquí no lo podemos hacer. Entonces, insisto, las academias de ciencia, pues esto es lo que hacen con muchísimo rigor, cuidar. La honestidad es uno de los valores más importantes de la comunidad científica internacional. Aceptar que las cosas pueden cambiar, pero el hecho de que hay mecánica cuántica, lo siento, ya no puede cambiar. El hecho de que existen moléculas, pues lo siento, si el Señor dice que no, que a lo mejor puede cambiar, que algún día alguien descubrirá que no hay átomos y moléculas, lo siento, eso no es cierto. Entonces, ciertos paradigmas científicos están muy bien establecidos, pero no tenemos aquí la posibilidad de seguir esa metodología tan bien establecida, para la cual existen otros mecanismos para hacerlo, pues que de nuevo, no lo vamos a hacer aquí, pero lo han hecho, pues todas las comunidades de científicos que son respetables.
Bueno, un último minuto, Jorge.
Sure.
De las-
Very briefly. Look, I agree with quantum mechanics. I've studied quantum mechanics. I do quantum mechanics, and some people liken what I do to quantum mechanics. But that is just, you know, playing games with words. Look, you're calling for peer-reviewed literature and so forth. Phil Jones, University of East Anglia, ClimateGate, scandal, fiddling the data, hiding the decline. He said in emails, we will do our damnedest, our level best to prevent publication of anything from the likes of these skeptics like Piers Corbyn in respectable literature. That is where these people stand. They're frightened of debate, and if you want me to debate anywhere, I will.
Very happy.
Ese minuto,
I will accept that.
ese minuto.
Sí, por supuesto aceptaríamos el debate, pero se ha analizado con muchísimo detalle
Okay.
el ataque
Why
al
did no one
IPCC.
come to our debate in Imperial College then? We had one in 2009. We asked them to come. They refused. We had an empty chair.
Un minuto.
Bueno, pues lo haremos si quieren, no hay problema.
Lo dejamos así y trataremos de recuperarlo después. Hay otras preguntas para todos ustedes. Para el profesor García Verdugo, le dicen, ha afirmado que las neuronas que no contactan con otras en el proceso neurogenético mueren. ¿Esto explica la importancia de que a nivel macro los seres humanos debamos estar más y mejor comunicados y en fraternidad en lugar de estar aislados? Una extrapolación para la vida, la comunicación entre nosotros, del mismo proceso científico de las neuronas.
Sí, antes quería, como el tema que acaba de terminar, pero me gustaría contar una cosa. A mí, yo creo que estamos participando, somos partícipes de este cambio climático, por supuesto, pero a mí lo que me preocupa más, porque seguramente cuando llegue
Acérquese el
este
micrófono.
cambio climático va a tardar muchos años, me preocupa más el mañana al pasado, que este incremento de CO2, este incremento de la contaminación puede tener efectos mucho más nocivos para nosotros. Sabemos que el número de espermatozoides de los hombres está disminuyendo brutalmente y es posible que no lleguemos al cambio climático, sino al cambio de la especie, porque nosotros ya no tenemos espermatozoides para reproducirnos. Era lo que quería decir.
Gracias por esa conexión
Bueno,
entre un debate y el otro. Ahora entramos en ese. Pero muy interesante la opinión. Adelante.
Efectivamente, las nuevas neuronas que se producen tienen que contactar con otras neuronas. Y la forma de que estas neuronas vayan contactando y formen circuitos van a sobrevivir. Estar en un ambiente social donde estás obligado a escuchar a personas, a tú dar tu idea, tu interpretación de lo que te están diciendo, esto ayuda a mantener el cerebro activo y las neuronas activas. Hay muchos experimentos en animales de experimentación donde cuando se encuentran aislados la neurogénesis prácticamente es casi nula. Pero cuando están socialmente con otros animales y tienen lugares donde esconderse, donde subir, bajar, aquí hay una neurogénesis mucho más importante y los circuitos son, hasta donde podemos decir, más activos.
Gracias. Y gracias también por la brevedad y la concreción. Para Dean Hammer, por favor, le dicen ahora: trabajo desde hace años en países africanos. Colaboro en verano con unos misioneros cristianos y en una visita a un hospicio de niños menores de 5 años, los infectados seropositivos eran capaces, con buena alimentación, con mucho cuidado, con mucho amor, de volverse seronegativos. En concreto, el porcentaje era de 75% de curación, de cambio, en menores de 2 años. ¿Hay alguna explicación científica para ese hecho?
Is the question whether they became seronegative
Sí.
or completely
Son
cured?
son niños menores de 5 años, normalmente seropositivos, que con los cuidados, buena alimentación, pasaban a convertirse en seronegativos. ¿Hay alguna explicación científica?
Well, I'm assuming that I'm sorry the questioner isn't here, but I'm assuming they are also getting antiretroviral drugs. Yes, so normally antiretroviral drugs completely stop the growth of the virus. And that's why people, when they get access to these drugs, don't develop AIDS and don't die and don't have all of the disastrous effects of the depletion of the immune system. In adults, once you have the virus, it stays with you forever. So even though it's suppressed, it's still hiding out. And if the drugs are stopped, the virus suddenly comes back, the virus proceeds to destroy the immune system and the person dies. With some children, it may be possible to become completely seronegative because their immune systems are so undeveloped that they have not yet fixed the virus in place and have not yet fixed the response. So it is possible for very young children to apparently become seronegative. The important issue there, though, is that if those kids are in a place and in a setting where they can get treatment, then hopefully they never would have become seronegative positive in the first place, because a single treatment of the pregnant mother prior to birth is enough for the vast majority of kids to be born free of the virus. And this is a very cheap, it's not the best solution. We would rather have nobody born to a positive mother, but there is the solution that even HIV-positive mothers with a very simple drug treatment can have babies who are born seronegative, and that, of course, is the hope for everybody who's in that situation.
Thank you. Para Aubrey de Grey, por favor, dice: si el mantenimiento del cuerpo hace que el metabolismo afecte de diferentes maneras y hace que una persona viva más o viva menos años, ¿por qué hay personas que, aun fumando desde los 12 años, viven hasta los 90 y personas con una dieta sana viven muchos menos años?
Okay, well, the simple answer to the question is that I wasn't talking about the natural variation in accumulation of molecular and cellular damage that exists in the population. There's a big natural variation, some of which is genetically based, and a lot of which is lifestyle based, and a lot of which is actually just due to sheer chance. I mean chance at the molecular level, Brownian motion-like chance, especially in the early embryo. So it's certainly no surprise to biologists that there are some people who are unusually robust in not accumulating various types of damage such that they can get away with an unhealthy lifestyle, and conversely, other people who are poorly equipped inherently and therefore don't live so long even with a healthy lifestyle. But the types of maintenance, in other words, removal of damage as opposed to modulation of the rate of its creation that I was talking about, are by definition things that none of us have. They are augmentation with medicine of the anti-aging machinery, so to speak, that we have naturally, and removal of types of damage that none of us removes at all without that medicine.
Decíamos que hay neuronas espejo en distintas ciudades de España y también siguen esto desde Ginebra, desde el CERN. Concretamente desde Pamplona preguntan si empeoramos el sistema inmune de nuestros bebés con las vacunas.
Bueno, esto es una pregunta para un inmunólogo.
Una pregunta para una conferencia casi, ¿no?
Casi. Esto es... no creo que...
Sí, he entendido la especialidad.
Sí. Es difícil de responder a esta pregunta porque hablamos en la especie humana. En principio no tienen por qué, porque las nuevas neuronas, lo que es la neurogénesis, lo que un poco para que el desarrollo del cerebro, no creo que le afecten demasiado este tipo de sustancias. Así que no creo que tenga un efecto.
Esto liga con otra pregunta también de Pamplona. Dicen, ¿hasta qué edad se produce neurogénesis en condiciones normales?
Neurogénesis en los humanos, hasta donde hemos podido ver, personas de 70, 80 años todavía tienen células que se marcan y que posiblemente representen neurogénesis. En los niños es muy importante los primeros estados de nuestra vida. Claro, no tenemos, así como en los animales podemos sacrificar animales a cada edad, en la especie humana eso no lo podemos hacer, obviamente. Pero los datos que tenemos en niños sí que estamos viendo por los marcadores que podemos utilizar que hay una importante neurogénesis. Y que esa neurogénesis, que ya he contado que va en gran parte al bulbo olfatorio de los niños y en parte a la corteza cerebral, lo que ha hecho seguramente la especie humana es decir, yo no voy a gastar tanta energía en los bulbos olfatorios que no me interesan. Voy a gastar más energía en enviar células a la corteza cerebral porque es un disco duro de memoria y aprendizaje que evolutivamente me va a servir más que el olfato. Es una especulación esto último.
Interesante. Están planteando que casi una preocupación sobre el aumento de la edad, de aumentar el doble, que podamos vivir 150 años o más. Lo preguntan desde la neurona del Centro de Arte Contemporáneo de Málaga. Dicen, si aumentamos la edad al doble, ¿estaremos en condiciones de abastecer a 14.000 millones de habitantes? ¿Estaremos en condiciones, si multiplicamos la población mundial por 2, sería?
So it is a very remarkable thing how people react to the sort of message that I gave today by fixating on the long-term future and not considering the health and the health benefits, the amount of suffering that we have today that we're proposing to alleviate with this medicine. I think that since we are, after all, only going to carry on getting older at 1 year per year, so there won't be any 200-year-old people for another 100 years, whatever we do, it's a little bit silly, to be honest, to try to predict how many people the Earth can have or will have so far in the future. We don't know, for example, whether the sorts of renewable energies that Jeremy mentioned earlier will come along to an extent that will reduce our global footprint a great deal. We also don't know how many children the average woman is going to want to have, or indeed at what age the average woman in the world as a whole is going to want to have them. Both of those things make enormous differences to the trajectory of global population. And so I find it rather sad that it is so common to hear questions like the one you just read out, people essentially jumping to what you might think of as knee-jerk dystopic scenarios rather than focusing on the problem that we have today.
Ripken quería apoyar algo.
This is to follow up. This is an interesting. This is an interesting question. When I teach economics, I ask when I teach business people economics, I asked them, do you know what the primary economy of the Earth is? And of course they don't know. It's photosynthesis. That's what runs the whole planet. Now, how many people can we sustain on the Earth? I came across a statistic a few years ago in the journal Nature, and I guess Science did it also, which startled me. We human beings are the youngest species on the planet, been here 175,000 years, anatomically modern humans. We have 6.8 billion of us, but we only represent 1/2 of 1% of the living biomass.
That's right.
1/2 of 1%. Today we are currently using 31% of all the net production photosynthesis on Earth. That's the most startling statistic in my lifetime. And we're heading to 9 billion people. This is not sustainable by any account. This shows that our species has overrun our relationship to the rest of the biosphere. And there's absolutely no way to do this. Now, in terms of older age, we do know that as people, especially in the developing world, become more prosperous, women have fewer babies.
And they have them later.
Absolutely. You can give them all the condoms, that doesn't make it. If women are slaves in the developing world, they're the beast of burdens, they're the energy carriers, so you have wives, you have a lot of kids. We know that what helped liberate women in the developed world was electricity, for sure. And then smaller families, fewer children, more education. So it's possible both to have a longer life, and a good longer life and a quality of life, but fewer births, in the sense of reducing the number of children per family. But again, we have to, at some point, address the carrying capacity of the planet to deal with the human lifestyle and population. And that's happening now. That isn't going to be in 50 years from now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that the only point I'm making over and above the fertility point that we agree on is that the carrying capacity of the planet can be altered by technology. And we can't predict what alteration is going to have happened 100 years from now.
Corbyn.
Yes, I agree with that very much. First of all, oil shale means that the energy crisis in terms of fossil fuel is ended. There's no need for it. We've got thousands of years of energy, even at 10 times the current consumption. Right. Second point, what could the planet actually support food-wise for the human race? And I think your point that we're a pretty small part of the world living cells is significant. Now, you look at the land mass. Before man cultivated, he was a nomad, and he couldn't produce much food, and his population was small until he managed agriculture, managing the land. And more land could be managed, maybe 10 times as much land could be managed to support maybe 10 times the world population. But more significantly, the sea has 300 times more living space in it for things to live in than the land. And currently we treat that as we are nomads. We chuck in a net and out comes a fish and you eat the fish. You could farm the sea in a different way from now. You could actually produce maybe 300 times as much food from the sea as it currently from the land, times the 10 times factor in on the land. It could be the world could support 3,000 times the current population. So talking about doubling, if we think clearly and organize the human race and apply technology, doubling or trebling or 10 times in the world population of humans is not a problem.
1 minute for Hammer and after for Rick.
Yeah, you know, it's fine to say that there's plenty of oil left. There's plenty of natural gas, too. But if
Yeah,
you go up into Pennsylvania and you see them drilling for natural gas,
okay, well, that's
they're
another problem.
screwing up the countryside really bad. And you go into somebody's home and they turn on the tap and they put a match to it and the water flames.
Problems can
That's
be
not
overcome.
cool.
Yeah, in general.
I'd rather have solar power, and if we have to pay a little bit extra for it, great. That's not available energy. We had to just destroy the earth to extract it. That's just, that's not cool.
Not cool.
Well, let me say I resonate with what you just said. My wife and I have a farm in the Blue Ridge Mountains, south of Pennsylvania, and we're all worried because our neighbors in Pennsylvania now are getting contaminated water. And once it's contaminated, it's over, and we're worried now about the shale gas in our area. But look, there's plenty of shale gas and tar sands and heavy oil. But if you believe that there is an impact on carbon into the atmosphere and climate change, as I do and many others, that would be a prescription for disaster. But let me talk about, just for a second, the food issue. Sometimes we don't get to the reality. We're so glib about, let's go here, let's go to the ocean. Be clear about why we have a food crisis in the short run and why we're using so much photosynthesis. We have very little arable land left in the world, but almost 40% of all the arable land that's in the world today is used to grow feed grain for animals, not food grain for people, so that wealthy people can live very high up on the chain with grain-fed meats, which is a huge amount of the photosynthesis and is not thermodynamically efficient. 1 acre of legumes produces 10 times more protein than 1 acre given over to feed grain for a cow so that we can eat it. So when I talk about photosynthesis, we have to take a look at the complexities and the injustices we've created in the world, where some live very high on the photosynthetic table, while others are denied access to the basic resources so they can feed their families. These are issues that are not just as a quick scientific fix. There is a social, political, and cultural reason why this is happening too. And it's about power distribution. And it's about who lives high up on the chain and who's denied access to the chain of life.
Estamos organizando aquí, si quiere, pequeños debates dentro del debate, pero al
I
final...
agree with that. There are big, social problems associated. I was just saying that technologically there is possibility. For example, North Africa could be made like it was once. It was a forest once. There could be more irrigation. All sorts of things could be done. And you could have a vast source of food there growing.
Preguntas ahora cambiando de asunto sobre las células madre y la relación, hay varias, con el alcoholismo. Células madre, alcoholismo, envejecimiento y en consecuencia disminución de la capacidad cerebral. Tenemos de distintas neuronas que nos han llegado y personas de la sala también. Adelante.
Bueno, la especie humana o no.
Adelante.
La especie humana, los alimentos que tomamos, que bebemos, o sólidos o líquidos, separamos las sustancias que no producen tumores de las que producen tumores. Las que producen tumores de las que no producen tumores. Y las que no producen tumores son buenas. Esas las podemos tomar. Pero hay un rango de cantidad de sustancias que, aunque no de tumores, pueden tener efectos nocivos en nuestro organismo. Y una de esas sustancias es el alcohol. El alcohol llega, cuando es a altas dosis, llega a alterar los circuitos de la corteza cerebral, los circuitos sinápticos, pero también toda célula que esté intentando proliferar, diferenciarse, sobre todo diferenciarse, se la va a cargar. Y en ese giro dentado, en esa fascia dentada, aparecen constantemente nuevas neuronas y si hay alcohol van a morir. En principio no pasa nada, porque la célula madre que está debajo dice, has muerto. Cuando hay muerte, responden las células madres a proliferar. Prolifero y me coloco en tu sitio, su hija se coloca en su sitio y voy a conectar, pero hay alcohol de nuevo y de nuevo va a morir. Con lo cual llega un momento en que las células madres no se dividen mucho, porque si se dividiera mucho se agotarían y ya no podrían seguir dividiéndose. Son muy resistentes y se dividen poco, pero las hijas, las nuevas neuronas, estas sí que son fulminadas cuando se están diferenciando. Claro, llega un momento con tanto alcohol de que las madres ya no producen nuevas neuronas, ya hay una neurogénesis adulta, aunque tengamos la corteza más o menos bien, estas neuronas no saben con quién, no hay neuronas ya para conectar, con lo cual aparecen problemas neurológicos en personas que no debían tenerlo a esa edad. Y esto es un problema que la sociedad debe de ser consciente y de transmitir, sobre todo a los jóvenes. Cuidado porque a esas edades, 18, 19, 15, 16, la corteza cerebral y especialmente el giro dentado tiene una actividad brutal, el giro dentado una enorme actividad de nuevas neuronas. Y aquí, claro, una persona con 80 años ya no tiene tanta neurogénesis, no puede no estar tan afectada, pero un joven de 15 años sí que la neurogénesis es muy activa. Estamos de lo que sabemos por los animales de experimentación y los primates no humanos. Así que yo el consejo y el mensaje que lanzo es que cuidado con el alcohol, porque ahora no pasará nada, pero cuando tengan 30, 40 años, sí que les va a pasar.
Cuidado con el alcohol y especialmente los jóvenes.
especialmente los jóvenes, porque ahí es donde, fíjense que en esos 14, 15, 16 años es cuando un sistema hormonal se pone en marcha, la neurogénesis está para aprender el conocimiento, la corteza cerebral ya ha desarrollado todos sus árboles dendríticos, su organización, y las nuevas neuronas están ahí buscando conectar, porque ahí es cuando más aprendizaje estamos, y si encima ese aprendizaje lo matamos con el alcohol, a la larga vamos a tener problemas cognitivos porque no vamos a tener más neuronas.
Usted ha hecho referencia en su intervención a esa relación entre las células madre, la mortalidad de células madre y el alcohol. ¿Tienen alguna investigación en curso en relación al tabaco? Lo preguntan también en la preocupación para los jóvenes, porque empiezan mucho más jóvenes, naturalmente para los mayores
Hay
también.
trabajos con éxtasis, hay trabajos con la cocaína, y la cocaína, por ejemplo, afecta más a las neuronas jóvenes, a las madres, aunque son muy resistentes, pero afecta a las madres. La cocaína es mucho más peligrosa porque va a destruir más abajo, no en la diferencia en las madres. El alcohol no hay datos, parece que tiene algún efecto, pero no hay datos de que pueda afectar el tabaco a la neurogénesis. Hay autores que dicen que sí, otros que dicen que no. Cuando ocurre esto es mejor.
Doctor Hammer.
Let me just jump into that and say that, of course, both alcohol addiction and cigarette smoking and all addictions have some genetic basis. They're at least partially affected by people's genetically determined personalities. So it's something that the culture needs to take into account, that there will be this drive for addiction and figure out how to best channel that in other ways. But one thing I think that's very interesting in the difference between Spain and the United States is that in the United States, we have a great deal of drug addiction now that's sponsored by the psychiatric industry in the United States. We have a tremendous number of psychiatric drugs. And one of the ones that concerns me most is the very widespread use of essentially amphetamines or speed in young children as a bizarre treatment for attention deficit disorder. And for some reason, it resets the dopamine pools. And so you're essentially giving crack cocaine to young children to make them be better students. And this has become very popular in the United States, almost 10% of students. Is this also being done in Spain and Europe, or is there more of a control on it, or what's the situation here?
Adelante.
Bueno, la situación en España, tal como la entendemos ahora, los fines de semana la juventud no para de tomar alcohol, es alcohol, alcohol. Durante el resto de la semana no toman alcohol, pero esos 2, 3 días, toda la neurogénesis, porque siempre el hipocampo está produciendo neuronas, esas nuevas neuronas que se tienen que diferenciar no se van a diferenciar, con lo cual a la larga va a haber un gap cada fin de semana sin capacidad de aprender cosas nuevas, y eso se va sumando y es... Ahora también hay otra cuestión. No, el alcohol puede que no afecte a todas las personas, a todas las razas por igual. Esto también, sabemos el problema que tienen los japoneses, que toman una cerveza y enseguida están... Hay otras razas que aguantan mucho más. También el aspecto genético o el aspecto de raza hay que tenerlo en cuenta. Pero el alcohol no es bueno. Esto es.
¿Doctor Hammer?
I think it's cocktail hour now.
Ha quedado sorprendido.
Altas dosis, obviamente, altas dosis. Yo me refiero a altas dosis.
Muy bien, últimos minutos del debate y vamos a retomar, independientemente de que intervienen ustedes sobre lo que creen conveniente, el asunto del cambio climático. Algunos preguntan, voy a acumular preguntas, ¿no estará el Sol en un ciclo de mayor actividad y por lo tanto calienta de más nuestro planeta? Es decir, estamos tratando de buscar, están aquí en esta pregunta, tratando de buscar este tipo de explicaciones, otro tipo de explicaciones. Y también preguntan al profesor Jeremy Rifkin, le preguntan, usted que asesora a varios gobiernos, ¿qué tiene que pasar para que los gobiernos se tomen en serio el cambio climático? Son dos preguntas, por tanto, mayor actividad del Sol y compromiso de los gobiernos en actuar en las medidas, usted ha sugerido algunas, que se pueden hacer, del control de la polución y otras medidas también, que son otras preguntas que están aquí planteando.
Pues,
Empieza
pues,
Mario Molina, después Rifkin. Venga, adelante.
sí, en cuanto a la actividad del Sol, pues de nuevo hay estudios muy claros, algunos resumidos por este panel intergubernamental, pero en fin, eso no es esencial, que analizan precisamente cómo ha cambiado la actividad del Sol, cómo ha cambiado en el pasado y su correlación con los cambios de clima. Y aquí de nuevo el consenso, o sea, lo que se concluye es que sí, efectivamente el Sol tiene una influencia, pero pues es menor, bastante menor que la influencia de las actividades humanas, y se puede cuantificar del orden del 10% de los cambios. Pero en fin, esto es algo que se puede medir, y, o sea, que es una respuesta que no depende de opiniones o de si me parece esto o lo otro. Se puede pasar por un proceso científico para hacer un análisis detallado y compararlo pues con mediciones de temperatura, y pues la conclusión está muy clara.
Usted asesora a un gobierno, el señor Rifkin asesora a otro. ¿Seguimos con el Sol? About the sun?
You want me to come back on that?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Well, the problem with the IPCC was they were only looking at half the question. They were only looking at the 11-year cycle ultraviolet, and as I told them a number of times, they'll never get any answer with that. It's a bit like Lord Nelson. He didn't want to obey some orders, so he looked through, put the telescope to the eye on which he had a patch, and said, I see no signal. Well, that is what the IPCC have done. What we're in now in terms of solar activity, particle magnetic effects, is we are in a solar minimum, and we're entering or starting solar cycle 24, which is an even numbered cycle, and that will be not a very active cycle, and even cycles are anyway cooler than the odd cycles. The important thing is, and I've got some Russian associates who say this as well as me, is that solar cycle 25 will be weak, which means it will be, the warmest bit will be cold. That is why we're heading for a world cooling.
Rifkin, por favor, please.
There are many governments in the world that are very serious about climate change. In fact, the European Union, which is the largest political space, and I should say the lead economy in the world. I'll maybe stop there. I mean, we talk about the U.S. and China, but the GDP of the 27 EU states exceeds the GDP of my 50 states, so it's a big player. And in Europe, I think you'll find the vast majority of the public believes that climate change is real, it's industrial induced. Government in European Union and the member states are serious. We wish everybody else was with us on this. But I think that will happen over time. And I welcome the skeptics to put in whatever they can into the equation, because it'll allow us to hone the science, it'll allow us to be tough and uncompromising in our ability to objectively look at the data. And that's been happening all along, though, as you said. But I welcome that always. In terms of what needs to be done, we have a double crisis, and the double crisis is connected and feeding off each other. First, we peaked on global oil, and we are moving into an economy that tries to restart the engine and collapses every time it starts, because we just don't have enough crude oil to supply not only our energy needs, but our pharmaceutical products and our construction materials and our plastics and our fertilizers and everything else. There's no substitutes. So we have to begin now to phase into a new economic revolution very quickly, or you're going to have what happened in the 15M movement here. You're going to have this all over the world. It's starting. The young people don't have a future. They don't have jobs. They're educated. And they don't see any way to grow the economy because they realize the economy is stalled. It's the infrastructure, it's the paradigm, it's the industrial age we're in. So on the one hand, we've got to move to renewable energy, we've got to move to an energy internet, we've got to move to a third industrial revolution, and in doing so, we'll abate climate change, because we'll get off carbon much quicker than just by government mandates and government targets. So I think they go together, and I think for a younger generation that's concerned both about their economic future and the future of their children and grandchildren in a climate-driven world, it makes sense to change the paradigm quickly. And that means all along the way, be doubtful, be skeptical, ask the tough questions, but also allow enough time to be reasonable and look at data that's being collected, and don't just be a skeptic for the sense of it, but take a look at the data. And everyone here should do what I did. It will take you 10 minutes to Google up the United Nations panel reports for the last 20 years. They're accessible, they're readable, they're data-driven, they deal with thousands of scientists across every discipline from every Academy of Science. Can they all be on the take? Can they all be lying to cover up some greedy agenda? I'm hard-pressed to believe that. And I'm not a naive person. I'm hard-pressed to believe that's the case.
Yeah.
Everybody very short,
Sure.
please.
So yeah, I've had in my own field, I've had a few run-ins with the mainstream, and occasionally I give a talk entitled "How to Be a Successful Heretic," which the first rule is be right. So I've got a challenge for Mario and Piers jointly. At the end of Piers' talk, if I remember, he made 6 specific...
Sorry, say it again?
Piers, at the end of your talk, you gave 6 specific predictions about things that you thought would happen in the quite near future, right, next few months. And I don't know, I can't remember exactly how you stated them, but I think you have them very precise, very quantitatively in terms of particular ranges of temperature or ranges of precipitation in particular places on particular dates. So, supposing that you, Mario, were to assign one of your students the task of going back over historical data and determining in his estimate or her estimate of the probability of each of his predictions being correct. All right? And then let's just multiply them all up. Or let's perm 5 through 6, which I think was what you said. I bet that the cumulative probability of Piers being right 5 times out of 6 will be less than 1 in 50.
Corbyn.
I bet. So,
Very short, Corbyn.
So,
please.
I would like to know, Mario, would you be willing to do that and to publicize the results of the probabilities and so on?
Si le parece, doctor Molina, interviene un minutito él y cierra usted esta parte porque estamos terminando ya. Last minute, please.
Me? I wasn't out this on.
1 minute, please.
Yeah, brilliant idea. I welcome anybody doing the statistics. William Hill gave up with us because, we were miles ahead. Describing the IPCC document as evidence, I think, is not really sustainable. It's an opinion document, and I would urge everybody to read it and find a single graph which relates real data of world temperatures to real data of carbon dioxide, and there are none.
Doctor Molina, terminamos ya. Adelante.
Sí, estoy, primero aclarando, totalmente en desacuerdo con lo que acabo de decir. Por supuesto que está todo basado en datos, pero hombre, como lo acabamos de oír de Jeremy Riskin, pues todos ustedes lo pueden checar y quizá concluir que todas las academias de ciencia están llenas de gente extraña que realmente no lee y que todo lo hace en base en la fe. Pues nosotros pensamos que más bien los que funcionan con base en la fe son los del otro lado. Pero por supuesto, estamos muy de acuerdo en hacer estas pruebas, pero hay que aclarar algo, hay que hacerlas con mucho cuidado. Y pongo un ejemplo de sus disciplinas. Cuando se hace una droga nueva, una medicina nueva, lo que se llama en inglés double blind, hay que hacer pruebas estadísticas muy cuidadosas, porque es muy fácil engañarse, es muy fácil, si tiene uno la mentalidad de buscar algún efecto, de encontrarlo. Y esto es lo que la comunidad científica ha hecho con muchísimo cuidado, pero está documentado. No me tienen que creer a mí, lo pueden ir y ver, pero hombre, por supuesto, es que esto ya se ha hecho. Se puede continuar, pero ya está en la literatura y ya está la respuesta, pues los reto simplemente a leer los resultados.
Las posiciones están claras, quedan aquí porque podríamos estar varias horas. Para continuar, 2 preguntas finales para la esperanza, para el profesor García Verdugo y para Dean Hammer. Preguntan muchas personas qué es lo próximo que va a venir, qué podremos resolver, qué éxito van a tener las investigaciones que se hace tanto en las células madre como en relación al cáncer, como con relación a otras enfermedades que nos azotan. Una pregunta sobre la esperanza de lo que viene. Usted ha hecho algún anuncio, alguna primicia nos ha traído.
Bueno, yo creo que las investigaciones y el descubrimiento de que existen células madres y que podemos empezar a dialogar con ellas es un avance muy importante. Esta es la cara agradable de la moneda, la posibilidad de que estas células puedan regenerar tejidos y órganos. Del cerebro estamos todavía lejos. La otra cara de la moneda es que esas células que tienen esa capacidad proliferativa, al tener capacidad proliferativa, pueden transformarse en tumores. Es la otra cara. Pero igualmente es importante porque si tenemos factores, moléculas y aprendemos a manejar a esas células, cómo pueden proliferar para reparar, también podremos saber las claves para que no formen tumores. Y esa moneda tiene un borde, y es que las células madres no son eternas, se agotan con el tiempo y envejecen. Luego la investigación con las células madres cubre desde la posibilidad de regenerar tejidos y órganos, del cerebro estamos muy lejos, la posibilidad de estudiarlas como elementos responsables del cáncer y como células que si envejecen por causas de alcohol, tóxicos, la posibilidad de que se repare no va a existir.
Liz Dinhammer, last minute.
I think the greatest advance we'll see in our lifetimes is an end to HIV/AIDS. I think that within our lifetime we'll see new treatments which will cure the virus even from people that are already infected. And I think that we will have effective biomedical means to stop people from getting infected from the virus. And the same thing will happen to HIV/AIDS as happened to polio, for example. And the greatest problem I foresee is not so much the science and technology, which is going forthwith, but to make sure that that's delivered to the entire world and to the population that needs it most.
Bien. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a todos. Yo creo que ha sido un magnífico inicio de este segundo Congreso de Mentes Brillantes. Magníficas las intervenciones y polémicas también, y extraordinario el debate. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.